Thank you, Linda, for agreeing to be the second speaker presenter for the Health and Wellbeing Priority Research Area seminar series. For our listeners, I'd like to just give a bit of an overview of who you are, Linda. And you've kindly given me some blurb. And Linda Shaw graduated in product design and worked initially as a junior shoe designer over the years, and has explored and worked in a number of industries, including retail, banking, and design. As a result of the economy, you were made redundant, but you took this as a challenge and an opportunity to upskill your existing skills and to learn new research skills, which has now led on to you just recently submitted your PhD, and you have informed me that you're going to be defending your PhD very soon, so we'll leave that as it is.
Yeah.
But your research interests include older adults and technology acceptance, robotic assistive devices, and the aging experience. So today's presentation by Linda is going to be looking at some of her PhD work, or soon to be PhD work, focusing on the understanding and perceptions and technology acceptance of exoskeletons by older adults. Thank you, Linda.
Thanks very much for that introduction, Hannah, and welcome everyone, and thank you for taking the time to listen to me today. As Hannah said, this is part of my PhD work that was just recently submitted, and I guess it just enhances further that I would like to share some of my work to date. These are images from some of my field work, but I suppose the overlying aspect of myself is that I'm curious. I like to explore what buttons need pressing, what doors need opening, and where they need to go, and how they affect or sometimes misaffect other people engaging it in their everydays. From a perspective of aging, we can see that aging conditions and factors such as arthritis and stroke are going to impact very much on our mobility and quality of life in the coming years. And on the other side of that, as emergent technology becomes more and more developed and established, we see more devices and systems coming on stream. However, very little is known about the older adults' opinions of the assistance of robots in the home. When we think of exoskeletons, we know that there's a lack of research on exoskeletons and user acceptance, and the perceptions of the use involving both the user and the healthcare professional. I would even go further and say that design teams and people working in labs, as they develop these exoskeletons, there is sometimes not always an embrace or an aspect of co-design where the older adult participants are involved in these developments. So, in recent times, exoskeleton development has primarily focused on rehabilitation, military, and industry areas. They're not necessarily classed as a medical device. The project I was actually involved in is a Horizon 2020 project, and I guess it defined firstly that users such as people post-stroke or with incomplete partial spinal cord injury, or the older adults who are getting frail, would be three of the user groups who were looked at specifically. My personal area was to look at the older adult population and how an exoskeleton can enhance or be accepted by those. We know that towards the middle of the century, for example, our older adult population will be a lot larger in size than working age population of adults and people, which may put a strain on economies and likewise a workforce. So there is identified needs for the future where exoskeletons could be seen as supports to keep this mobility and enhancement there. I guess the other thing about exoskeletons as they assist mobility is the fact that they allow the person to actually remain vertical and not necessarily in a sedentary or a seated state. This is a good effect purely on the fact of the physical manifestation, the organs, the blood, things like that are allowed to enable themselves to be mobile for a longer time. And mentally, I guess people prefer looking and being eye to eye when they communicate or engaging with other people. SoSoft was developed by a consortium of partners with the EU project experience in Exoskeletons. It would provide low to moderate mobility assistance to specific user groups that I've mentioned already. And 9 partners, including University of Limerick, which is where I was based, we were responsible for identifying the user needs, user-centered design, the iterative development of the exoskeleton, and the service system as well. Some of the prototypes that were developed during the project, they were tested in lab settings with the research teams and the participants. Some of the materials initially identified were seen as suitable or not for an exoskeleton, and some of the systems and the sensors, the actuators, were defined as suitable or not. The partners all collaborated and interacted with the user groups to refine and keep working to enhance and iterate on the prototype. There was new knowledge and learning through research by design. Established friendships and working networks were there to pursue the new projects. And the key benefits learned to further development of soft robotics and wearable exoskeletons and exosuits. And finally, as a wrap up, because this project has now, in its current phase, has stopped. And prior to that, there was a hosting of an Exoskeletons and Soft Wearable Robotics Day that would share the current knowledge on where we were at that particular time, and also, I guess, an opportunity to network and seek out further collaborations and opportunities. One of the aspects, particularly working with older adults in relation to product design, comes up is a feature of stigmatism or sometimes ageism, where perceptions of older adults can be, I guess, sometimes self is considered, or others' perception by others in society. From a perspective of technology, older adults are aware of the importance to learn how to use the new technologies in order not to feel alienated from society. There is a risk that older adults are a vulnerable group when we consider the digital divide, such as where emerging technology particularly is coming at such a pace that the ability or the skills or competency of the older adult may not match or keep up. This can be seen as a barrier to technology. So as a little bit of wit, we can sometimes perceive that older adults are a certain way. However, as an example, I can give you 2 extremes from my fieldwork. One being where the 80-year-old gentleman who came to meet me over a fieldwork session was talking about the dash cam that he had just purchased and how he would fit it, and he understood the technology and the application of it. And at the other end of that, I had an older adult participant, another male, who expressed how if he was booking a holiday online or checking his online banking, felt a lot happier and was more comfortable when a family member supported or assisted in this. Which then brings in the technology acceptance themselves. So how one of the main questions was how can you ensure autonomy or independence is of the older adults' control or intention. We sometimes do feel that there's a self-fulfilling prophecy where older adults may actually be telling themselves, I might break it, or I'd rather not do it, I'll trust somebody else to do it. Sometimes, though, older adults inadvertently become infantilized, where people who care for them, and it is generated out of love, will say, oh, I'll do that for you, or I'll take care of that, just in case it's a little bit complex or whatever. So it is something to be very mindful, particularly when it comes to emerging technologies. The areas of where technology acceptance models that I looked at were back in the day before even we had internet. It's very hard to imagine in such a short space of time we now have internet and so many other technology assistance and supports. And one in particular was the technology acceptance model as introduced by Davis. There have been iterations and evolve of this over the years, and it's only when we get to about 2010 where we have Hearing introduce his Almir model. And in 2014, we have Chen and Chan discuss their senior technology acceptance model. One caveat I'd add here is that hearing was very much looking at social robots and how they can assist or support older adults. And Chen and Chan were looking at everyday technology, existing devices such as mobile phones or laptops. What I identified then as I pursued my work further was that, in fact, there was no exoskeleton acceptance model. Something that's wearable and somewhat embodied by the user is a big deal. It's not just a pair of trousers, it's not just a pair of shoes. It does have technology features on it, and it does require understanding how can we bring the best out in it. And as a designer, that's your intention. You have a responsibility to the people who are going to wear and use your devices daily. So the purpose of my study was to go out in the field as a means to studying technology acceptance with a view to develop or adapt a technology acceptance model for older adults and exoskeleton use and the optimizing of that exoskeleton use. I would use qualitative study with grounded theory and ethnographic research methods. This included observation, audio and image capture during semi-structured interviews, and this particular aspect of the fieldwork, it was the second of fieldwork opportunities I had, and it went on over a course of 5 months. What I'd like to share with you now is this video of me having a go. One of the things when I go out to my participants is I love to see what devices they're engaging with and actually have a go. It's often the very first time I'm ever engaging in these devices myself. This was their stair lift, and it has been a point of conversation for a lot of people that come into the home of this couple.
Yeah, you would have a bit of a difficulty because it's tight.
Yeah. I'll just let it play because some of the audio is there.
See what is going on with the things there.
But it is nice actually, it is smooth.
If you go all the way around the corner now.
Well, I'll come back down.
Yeah.
I'll come back down. And that's why I'm
All right, yeah. Well, it could be, if that was the case, they could have put it on the other bed.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I imagine you'd have that as a thing that
Yeah, with the
you adapt to left or right.
no problem.
Yeah. And if there was any, does he have to service this every year or anything? Every 2 years. Okay. It doesn't charge itself the battery.
Does, yeah. So just take the top of the bottom.
All right, so once it's in space.
Yes.
Oh, that's particularly interesting. So once it goes into the ground.
It runs on the battery, you see.
Yeah.
It runs on the battery.
So what I would say is just in relation to the stair lift, a couple of observations was I'm not a very particularly tall person. However, as I was turning and going around the stairs, that anticipation was there, but likewise I was noticing my knees were relatively close to the wall of the hallway stairs. There was no handrail on the stairwell going up on the wall side, and the support band that carries the stair lift up and down the stairs means that it's actually out perhaps about 20 centimetres or so from the stair banister. This takes away from the space to use the stairs manually. And likewise, one very big noticeable feature was the fact that as I docked the stair lift, if I hadn't docked it correctly, the battery wouldn't have had a chance to recharge, and likewise, there is a risk then that would not facilitate or enable me to actually get back up the stairs if that wasn't done correctly. So they were just some observations to share during that particular episode. So my recruitment strategy overall was that this group of participants, there was 24 in total. Some of them had mentioned to their friends who invited them onto my study. And they were all sourced through local community groups in Ireland, such as post-stroke groups or active aging or age-friendly groups also. And basically the criteria was that they just needed to be aged over 60, they needed to be living independently, no cognitive impairment. The breakdown of the participants, there was 24 in total, and I had 19 sessions. So some of them were conjoined, which can be a very interesting feature, where particularly if you have people who know each other very well from over the years, be it friends or married couples or partners, they may in fact be inclined to remind each other of certain things, or argue with each other, or point out things that they disagreed with in relation to some of the topics discussed. What I used, I like to call them conversation guides, because it's not a specific big kind of elaborate questionnaire as such. If you were to see my template, it's very blank in areas, so each of the questions would have a lot of blank areas for me to memo and document any observations or notes taken during the time. In addition, I would have also been recording audio with the participant, and sometimes we would do some video or footage, such as you've seen already. One particularly interesting area that I liked to go into was the final question: how do clothing and dressing options change as we age? This was interesting because our bodies do change as we age. How would we actually deal with the wearable robotic trousers, the getting on and the taking off of them, doing daily tasks such as toileting? If you're actually in the midst of wearing one, how does that affect it? Likewise, the colour. The participants in Ireland that were discussing it with me were inclined to think that black was not a good colour for an exoskeleton or a wearable robotic assistive device, purely down to the relationship that it had with a perception of depression, or it was somebody who was grieving. So that would be something to look at. And I know one of my participants commented that they would like chameleon trousers or chameleon clothes, where in fact the colours of the trousers could be whatever colour they chose on any particular day. And I guess as we look speculatively in the future, why not? Technical textiles will have that capacity as we go forward. So the results of this particular fieldwork, there was 976 minutes of conversations, 1,391 codes were generated from over 8,000 lines of text. Out of the codes, there were 85 categories developed, and further condensing of that, there were 5 themes that emerged. These themes were aging and life stage experiences, quality of life, assistive technologies, health conditions and care, products and service systems. And I guess I've left this as a note, quite a wordy one, not for me to go through with you directly, but if you did wish to recap on it, you have an opportunity to relay the screen. But I guess one of the things is technology acceptance models have had numerous models developed as a means to optimize adoption of technology. And we know that there are few TAMs that measured this adoption by older adults, and none were actually revealed to consider the emerging and wearable robotic assistive devices such as exoskeletons or in fact exosuits. The design teams of complex wearable lower limb exoskeletons need to understand and learn from what the user is experiencing, and recording this experience formally as a means to efficiently conceptualize and develop the device further. The 5 themes that emerged from analysing and interpreting the fieldwork provided broad understanding of expression by older adults about the acceptance of lower limb exoskeletons. The themes together, they holistically generated the knowledge, and this was the basis for 3 new constructs. These weren't ever previously seen on existing technology acceptance models, and the main reason was that the fieldwork gave me the knowledge to develop this and bring it forward. The new constructs were experiential perception, self-liberty, which differs from self-efficacy, because now we're trying to encourage and enhance that the older adult themselves is autonomous about what they want to do, and to state it in a way and to see if they are engaging with an exoskeleton, are they believing in their ability to manage and control this? And the quality of life enhancement, will an exoskeleton actually be a good idea, and can it enhance that they can get out and dance on the floor for a bit longer, or walk for that bit further, or just have autonomy over their world and enjoy it. So experiential perception is defined as the perception the older adult has of the interaction with the lower limb exoskeleton when using or wearing it. Features and ideas such as the noise of the exoskeleton. Will it actually be a noisy, clicky, clacky kind of noise? Is it going to draw attention, or has it enough features that it's desired by the older adult? Self-liberty, as I was explaining earlier, but it's defined as the autonomous perceptions of control by the older adult when using or wearing the lower limb exoskeleton. And quality of life enhancement, it's defined as relating the use of the lower limb exoskeleton to activities and instrumental activities of daily living, ADLs or IADLs. So what way was this application, and how did it come towards the end of my PhD as I developed and analysed and interpreted the findings? Well, we're familiar in design circles certainly of the double diamond, and it's relied as we define and develop concepts and prototypes. Within that double diamond, however, I figured there was a space for more iteration, and I came up with this iterative design assessment model, which is an IDEM. So you have your phases beginning at introduction, going through perception, experience, perceived impact, analysis, evaluation, opportunity. And then you have the option to either go back in to introduce it again and do further studies and testing, or go on further to develop and take it forward. When it comes to Exoscore, you'll see it's squared off, and it's in aligning with three of the aspects of the IDEM, being perception, experience, and perceived impact. And if we consider the perception being how do we imagine or perceive the experience to the exoskeleton, this allows the design teams the opportunity to actually evaluate and measure what anticipation or apprehension perhaps can be documented prior to actually wearing an experience in the exoskeleton. When it came to the experience phase, we relied on a system usability scale to capture what were the experiences as various tasks were undertaken wearing the exoskeleton by the older adult participant. And the perceived impact, so what's the reflective sense that the older adult has towards the exoskeleton experience, and can they see it as a worthwhile space for them in their world? That was where we came to, and I'd like to thank you all for your attention today, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you, Linda. So with these pre-recording seminars, I'm asking our presenters three questions, and my first question to you is, what has been your biggest failure and what lessons has it taught you?
The biggest sense of failure, I guess, is reflecting back to the time when I was made redundant. At that time, I was working in financial services and banking, and I had children depending on me, and likewise a mortgage. And that was mentally a strain for quite a while until I realised actually I have total freedom here. I can actually explore and develop and get back into design, which is where my heart was. And that did afford me the opportunity to fall right back in, complete my degree, complete a research master's, and now I'm just at the end of a PhD. And when I reflect and look back on the last 10 years, I would say, wow, I didn't know that could happen. And that was as a result of something that I could have perceived very negatively. But in a way, I figure I embraced it.
Definitely, and hopefully in the not too distant future, you'll be celebrating.
Oh, very much so, yes.
What improvements in relation to your research, in relation to the discipline or interdisciplinary work that you conduct, what improvements would you like to see happening in the future?
I think particularly design research as I guess a part of design, it's seen sometimes as the fuzzy front end, and I know in industry we sometimes expect answers and solutions very quick and very efficient. However, anthropological work or explore qualitatively is something that takes time, and I think we sometimes do need to take that pause in. It would be great to see industry, as much as academia, embrace and respect the idea that timeliness is building richness to a project, and sometimes stepping away from something or sometimes free falling into the field work is a perfect opportunity to discover new surprises and new adventures.
Great. And finally, you may have kind of answered this question in from the second question, actually. What are the pros and cons to working in your discipline?
I think the pros certainly are the ability to be creative and to cross disciplines. We see, such as the D School, and I think it's in Stanford, where you have other areas such as business or medicine, or that embracing a design approach or a design thinking approach. We see companies now having a chief design officer, a CDO aspect. So in industry, I see that type of change being very positive and embracing to the abilities designers can actually bring as an input to industry. I think for when it comes to developing or coming to a stage where you have a PhD, it may still have a little bit of a traditional aspect to it, where you actually are now seen as an academic. When that's not the case, it's where you have it just means you've actually explored for quite a long time and have something to share with the world. I mean, out of my PhD work, I've brought out some papers, I've published some papers, I've presented at conferences, but it's now looking back, and actually there's a whole lot more I could write about just from that piece of work alone. And that's only 3 years' work. So you're thinking, how rich can this be? It's not just about the PhD. You're fortunate to work on a project and you have results that you'd like to share. And most importantly of all, when you're out in the field, be it with whatever group or demographic you're working with, but in my case, it's been with the older adults over the last 6-7 years or so, their time and their thought and their insight are so rich, and you have a responsibility. They've given all this to you, and you have a responsibility to work with it and to share it in a very appropriate way, and always acting with integrity, of course.
That sounds fascinating, and thank you for an insight, a very brief insight into some of your research. Do you have any other comments that you would like to share with the listeners?
Just to remember, trust yourself, particularly after your undergrad, where you're considering where to go. Remember, you have a worth that's worth whatever industry or discipline you're working in, and you're there to contribute. And it wouldn't be the same without you.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.